Thanks to each of you who took the time to come down here this morning. We truly appreciate it. And thanks to everybody who's joined us online. Please feel free to send any questions or comments in the chat. I'll be monitoring as we go. I'd like to introduce Dr. Allison Brashear. I report to Dr. Brashear in the hat that she wears as Vice President for Health Sciences here at the university, in addition to the job that she keeps as Dean of the Med School. So thank you for being willing to do the introduction this morning, Dr. Brashear. And I'm excited to say, if anybody in the audience isn't aware, it seems that the National Academy of Medicine awardees flock together. So we have Dr. Adler-Milstein here and Dr. Brashear having just been named this past year. So with that said, I will turn it over to her.
So much, Dr. Cizek, and if I just a round of applause for Jill and her team that put this together. I know there's a lot of people on Zoom, but we are so appreciative. The amount of education and grants and things that go through her office is absolutely amazing. So, Jill, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So it's really my pleasure to welcome you to the third annual Health and AI Symposium. We have a great lineup here today, and for those of you on Zoom, I hope you can really appreciate the depth and breadth that we have here for you. Artificial intelligence is changing everything we do. In healthcare, it's going to make us more efficient, but it's also going to help us with basic science. It's already helping us with drug discovery, with the work of Tom Grant and many others. But I would liken it almost to the internet. I actually am old enough to remember when I got an email account at my alma mater at IU. And, what has changed now with AI is on such a rapid pace compared to just what happened with internet. I see that we have colleagues. All right, welcome. Roswell Park is our partner and it's a comprehensive cancer center. NIH funded, is truly foundational to the health of Western New York. There's individuals from Kaleida Health. I see a whole group who's from Kaleida. Excellent, thank you. And the Mother Cabrini Foundation, maybe online, Highmark Health. We're incredibly grateful for your partnership. As we think about AI, I also want to give a shout out to all of the individuals, particularly our colleagues at Kaleida, but also ECMC and UBMD. We are going to Epic. And right now, for those of you new to our environment and from UCSF, where you've had an integrated system for a long time, right now, in Buffalo and Western New York truly walks around with CDs and discs and papers. And if you're seen at one of the hospitals and then end up in the other hospital admitted or in their emergency room, it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to see the labs and the imaging. Epic will give us AI tools that we will need to learn, and we will then be able to build on with the strength that we have here at UB, which of course we have Empire AI, which is the world's largest academic computing system. And so while we're really excited about Epic, we also really want to make sure that we're partnering and we understand the power and the impact. So I'm also pleased to welcome Siwei Liu, who is our new director of UB Institute for Artificial and we also are going to be discussing AI and health equity. I believe everyone here knows how important health equity is to all of us in Buffalo. We want to improve the health outcomes of Buffalo, particularly the East and West Side. And I think everyone knows we were awarded a grant from the state. ECMC and UBMD was awarded $110 million to work on getting primary care in the East Side, building the building, implementation of the EHR over a 5-year period. And so we will be building primary care in partnership with ECMC, and we will be seeing more patients in the East Side. That's going to be tremendous for making sure that every patient in Buffalo has a quarterback, not just the ones who have the text of the dean to figure out how to get plugged in, but every patient has a quarterback, because that's how we're going to improve health outcomes. I know that we have Girish Nakardi, who is the department chair at Mount Sinai Health System. Girish spoke here about 9 months ago. I met with Girish and the team at Mount Sinai a couple of months ago, and they are part of Empire AI, and they're helping think really proactively about how we do this. Heather Gardner is our new director of the UB Health Equity Research Institute. And now it's my deep pleasure to introduce Dr. Julia Adler-Milstein. She is professor of medicine and chief of clinical informatics and digital transformation, and a newly elected member of the National Academy of Medicine. Her scholarship has shaped national conversations on digital transformation and responsible use of AI and health and IT. And I just told her that New York has a new law to put some governors around the use of AI and health and others for companies that are in New York. Her keynote is Closing the Gap Between AI Capabilities and Health System Readiness. And she's going to really demonstrate how we move forward with impressive AI capabilities like Epic, like Empire AI, and make real world impact. It's really my pleasure to welcome her. UCSF is at the cutting edge of the use of AI, and we're so pleased that she came all the way across the country and is the first keynote of the day. So welcome so much.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here. Can you hear me? It sounds okay. All right, sounds quiet up here, but as long as you can hear me. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. My layover in Denver went okay, just all the things that I was worried about to arrive at this time here today to be able to have a conversation with you really about AI. I always feel like, when I hear words like cutting edge, and I don't think anyone at this point feels like they're on the cutting edge. Like, this field is moving so quickly that we're all just trying to keep up and understand this new technology, its potential, how to work with it in all these different contexts and settings. And so on the one hand, it feels like it's just an overwhelming time, but it's also incredibly exciting because the technology is actually creating benefits in ways that I think, at least in the sort of clinical settings, we haven't seen with a lot of the technologies that we've worked with in the So with that as context, my talk today is really focused on thinking about this gap between where the technology is and sort of where the delivery of healthcare is, and what are some of the major issues that we need to be thinking about as we try to translate this growing set of applications that we think are ready for real-world clinical settings actually into practice in ways that are safe and effective. And the moment it works, and I'm not sure it does. So let's see. Oh, we've got, okay, let's see. I can stand behind the podium. That was the technology in a technology talk, so almost a given. Okay, perfect. Sounds good. So again, the explosion of different applications, I think, is it's mind-boggling, all the different things that AI is touching. In fact, it's hard to now come up with something that AI is not touching, for which there's not a solution that someone, at least in San Francisco, is knocking on our door saying, do you want to implement this? So this is, just sort of one example of all the breadth of AI use cases, again, that are spanning life sciences and pharma, providers, payers. Again, you could probably add other health system stakeholders here. And what I like about this image, and I think we could agree, spend all day just talking about what should be in what quadrant, is that it differentiates this concept of technical readiness, like, is the tool actually technically performing well, from market readiness? Like, is actually the market ready for that type of tool and solution? And technical readiness, I think, has some intuitive understanding of what that might mean. But this concept of market readiness, I think, is a much more complex concept. Like, what does it mean for the market to be ready for a tool? Does it solve an important problem? Is it going to be integrated into user workflow? There's sort of all these different dimensions. And so that's really what I want to parse in my talk as we start to think about closing this, the gap. Should we go to the next slide? I think these issues are really coming to an interesting head in the context of academic medical centers or systems that are both sort of have the school or campus side, the research capabilities, and the healthcare delivery side. And so if you think about each of these circles as well as their intersection, again, there's AI applications in each of them. I was just having a side conversation about, for me, I've really been in the medical education space. I'd say over the past 3 months, I've never had more meetings about medical education and how AI is changing medical education. And so again, I think there's something about this technology that's really bringing together different aspects of academic medicine to have challenging conversations. And we're asking questions that, again, I think nobody feels like they know the answer to, but feel really urgent to answer and bring together. And so if I suspect some of this may be already happening here, but if not, I think this is the moment to really be thinking about some of these intersections and the way that this new technology is going to raise new questions and really push us to think about sort of what should be done by humans and what should we really offload to technology, given, again, these incredible new capabilities. Keep going. Okay. Sounds good. Go. I have to say that I stole this slide from a different keynote address because for me, it was one of those moments where you see a picture and you're like, yes, that captures something that really resonates. And I think one of the most profound early hallmarks of this era is that the technology is moving much faster than our people and processes can keep up. And so what that means is that we have, invention, broadly speaking, right? The new applications, large language models, again, even within large language models, all these different forms of them. Now we're talking about agentic AI models. Again, I'm not a deep technology person. You certainly don't need to be either, but conceptually understanding sort of the innovation, the invention dimension. And then those get translated usually into innovations. Like, how are we going to take this general purpose capability and turn it into like a product or solution that we think solves a specific real world problem? So those pieces, I think, are moving, really quickly. But what then gets slowed down is from the innovation to the diffusion. That's when the people and processes come in. And so it is things like thinking about, learning curves, safety, organizational changes, laws and norms, profoundly human constructs that have to make sense of this new innovation. How do we put this in place in ways that are effective? And again, I think AI is really challenging us in terms of do we have the right legal and regulatory frameworks to sit around AI? Do we have the right framework for assessing safety? And so this is the hard work of, I think, really feeling like we're ready to take innovation and put it into practice. And the other piece I like about it is that it shows that it is cyclical because we're doing a lot of experimentation, right? Where we'll put something in place and we'll try to learn sort of, is it doing the things that we hope it will do? Is it not doing the bad things? And so a lot of that work is iterative. This is obviously a generic image, right? It's not specific to healthcare. And so if you look at the concepts that sit in that diffusion bucket, I think we can all agree that healthcare has the most extreme versions of those in any industry, right? We are the most heavily regulated industry. We are the industry that probably thinks the most about safety. And we're the industry that certainly thinks a lot about sort of the process of learning. We invest a huge amount in our trainees and trying to understand their trajectories through medical school and beyond. And so, again, that's why I think these issues are particularly salient in our context, because each of these have a lot of depth coming into the AI era, and we're really wrestling with then the implications of AI for each of these. So if we go to the next slide. And this concept that I've been trying to articulate between thinking about innovation and diffusion in the AI world, I think we need a name for the science of how we approach this work, because some of it is just like doing the work itself, but some of it is sitting above that and saying, what is the science that will help us understand how to translate AI capabilities into better healthcare and health system performance, again, across sort of settings in the way that any good sort of research or field should do. It's not just what happened at UCSF or what happened at UB, but what is the science of this? And so this is one of the first articles, I think, that's like pointed to the need for this science. And because they were the first ones, they got to name it. So they refer to it as a health AI delivery science. And delivery science is another field that I think is growing in sort of recognition, the understanding of how to introduce new things into healthcare settings and understand both the process of implementation and the impact of that introduction. And so thinking about what is this new field of AI delivery science, and I think what we're recognizing is it's going to draw on a lot of different pieces of existing fields. So things like design thinking, process improvement, implementation science, and then coming together specifically with thinking about, again, what are the unique capabilities of AI and how do they change interaction with human systems. So I think right now this field exists in name, and collectively what we're trying to understand is like, what is the science of this field and how do we do this work collectively so that we all learn and benefit? Go to the next slide. So I think as I think about the topics that I'm hearing this field start to discuss, there are some that I think every AI conference that I go to, this is what people are talking about. The need for AI governance. So what is the governance that sits around AI tools and health systems and other contexts that sort of decides whether a tool is going to be safe and should be introduced into that setting? That has come with the emergence of new roles. So as of about 2 or 3 years ago at UCSF, we have our first Chief Health AI Officer. That is now a role that we're seeing spread across a lot of different systems and settings. I think even if it's not a formally named role, there is someone whose job is now in charge of thinking about how do we bring AI into our health system. So again, it's coming with an understanding that we need some new roles. Assessing AI tools for things like bias and drift. These are unique concepts to AI tools that we didn't have with prior forms of clinical decision support or predictive models that were rules-based, right? They didn't evolve on their own over time. So again, a lot of conversations about how do we assess the effort that are going into thinking about the methods you need to detect those changes, monitor for them, and then react and respond. And then we talk a lot about addressing this AI digital divide. And it's already come up this morning in the context of equity. I think it's a real concern from different dimensions, both the health systems themselves, the haves and have-nots, but also from a patient perspective, right? These tools are increasingly in the hands of patients. And I think the ability to make sure that a breadth of patients are able to sort of work with them and make sure that they're positive contributors to their healthcare journey is another dimension of equity that we need to discuss. So I suspect more is coming on that later. But again, I think there's pretty widespread recognition of that as an important topic. And I'm really glad to see that, because in some of our prior eras of digital transformation, the equity concern we're talking about them a lot, and that's a good thing, but I'm here to tell you something new. And so the rest of my talk is going to be the topics that I think are like really critically important to health AI delivery science, but perhaps are not yet on the conference circuit. And so I hope that what I will convince you today is that these topics are equally important as we move forward in this AI era. And again, thinking about how we bridge the divide between where the technology is and where our human systems are. So if we go to the next slide. Okay. Ta-da, 5 concussions. Okay. Okay, keep going. Okay, perfect. Okay, so again, I'm just going to go through these 5 topics and just give you a little bit of is patient-centric and is really thinking about electronic health information, which I'll tell you about in a minute, plus the existence of large language models that patients have access to. So ChatGPT, Claude, name your model, right? Things that anyone with an internet browser could sort of bring up and have access to. And is this going to be a transformational force in terms of patient engagement? And if it is, are we ready for that state? So electronic health information, so under HIPAA forever, patients have had the right to access their full medical record. And then sort of in the last era of digitization, that got evolved into having a right to an electronic copy of your health information. So that means every patient in this country should be able to go to a health system where they got care and ask for literally every piece of electronic data about their health and healthcare. So what we thought is like, well, once patients have access to their data, right, this is going to break open, patient engagement, right? They're going to, go online and find their health information and sort of read through their chart and be super engaged. And if we go to the next slide, pretty much didn't happen. And so this is data that we collected from the first 12 health systems that enabled patients to connect their electronic medical record to Apple Health Kit, right? So we thought like, maybe you're not going to go online, find your portal, download your record, but like here it is on your iPhone. It's like relatively simple to connect the two. And what you can see is that at the best performing health system, they got about 2% of their patients to connect their medical record to their iPhone. So this was sort of like huge amount of buzz and excitement, and really just we saw that patients weren't coming to do this. They didn't find that it was useful or interesting. And so I think for a while things have been sort of quiet in terms of patient engagement with their data. Again, there are consumer apps out there. It feels like a health ecosystem where there should be opportunity, but really we still haven't fundamentally made it easy for patients to interact with and inquire about and with their data in ways that are useful to them. So if we go to the next slide. So now that we have large language models, I think there is a potential that this is going to be the new era and really the long-awaited era for patients. But some of the early studies, I think, are giving us some pause. And so these are two studies that I wanted to highlight for you about what happens when patients start to use large language model capabilities to understand different aspects of their health and healthcare. The first is really around trust, and are patients accurately able to distinguish accurate from inaccurate output from a large language model of which they've asked a health question. And so this study came out, I think, a few months ago, and basically found that patients were not able to differentiate high accuracy and low accuracy responses. And if you think about why, it's because that's exactly what large language models have been trained to do, which is to present information as trustworthy, whether or not it is accurate. And so to expect that non-experts are going to be able to differentiate an accurate from an inaccurate response is probably too high a bar. And so that's concerning, because if we are going to be presenting information back through a tool that presents it as very trustworthy, we can't expect that the patients are going to be able to differentiate. How to solve that problem, I think, is quite tricky because, again, what the technology is good at is presenting information in a trustworthy way. And we're probably not going to be able to take all patients and upskill them to the level where they are an expert. So again, I don't know the answer here, but I think this is something that we need to be thinking seriously about. The second piece is just, the second paper is really just trying to understand the process of that inquiry. Did patients even understand the kinds of questions to ask of a large language model to elicit the information that they were trying to get? And so what this study basically found was that patients didn't even know sort of the right terms or terminology to use with their electronic medical record to get the large language model to answer the question they were trying to ask. So there's a piece of it that's about sort of trust and accuracy, but then there's a piece of it of just a non-expert doesn't really know how to work with these tools to get the type of information they're seeking. So I think these are the first two studies that I've seen that are really sort of putting bringing into sharper focus some of the issues that we need to be thinking about as we give patients access to large language models in the context of now having their own health record data that they can plug in. So that's a little bit of a bad news story. I am going to end this section with some good news. So if you go to the next slide. One of the groups that sit within my division at UCSF is called the Coordinating Center for Diagnostic Excellence. We run a seminar series that's called Innovations at the Intersection of AI and Diagnosis. And about a year ago, we had a panel with some patients who were talking about how the use of large language models had transformed their care. And one of the people who spoke was a mom who had a son who went through just like a horrific, diagnostic journey. 17 doctors over 3 years and, incredible amount of testing. They could not figure out the diagnosis. And so she finally took her MRI reports and fed them line by line into ChatGPT and finally figured out that he had tethered cord syndrome. And so I hear examples like this, and that's what gives me hope. But she was a highly motivated person, right? Was deeply involved in her child's care, knew even, right, to sort of that the MRI reports were likely like the key piece of information that could give her insights that maybe her child's medical team had missed. And there was even a particular piece in the MRI report that caught her eye, and that was sort of where she went deeper with ChatGPT to inquire. So again, I think this is giving us a real sense of sort of where things are today, which is that like in the right hands of a well-informed, highly motivated patient, there could be opportunities to improve various aspects of care, but I think diagnosis is chief among them. And so it's really encouraging to hear stories of patients who are taking this into their own hands. And again, now that they have electronic access to their medical record, they're able to do a lot more to advocate on their own behalf. But the flip side of that, right, is that when we look at these broader studies of the general public, we can see these sort of key gaps emerging in terms of even knowing the questions to ask, as well as being able to differentiate high and low accuracy information. So again, I'm coming here to ask questions. I wish I had all the answers. I don't. But I think we need to start thinking about how we can support our patients in using these tools. And again, for health systems, I think this is a really tricky question of how much do you want to be mediating that, right? Do you actually want to be sort of facilitating and guiding your patients in how they do this? Once they get information, how does that loop is going to come back to you in some form or another, because a patient's going to have a new question that they feel like they need to talk with their doctor and care team about. And so again, thinking about these processes and how they're going to work with patients being much, maybe informed is not the right word, they will have a lot more information, but needing to partner with them to really make sense of it and figure out if that's useful information and should change the trajectory of their care or not, I think is the challenge that we have in front of us. Okay, so we've gotten through question number 1. If we go to the next slide. So question number 2 is different. It's not specifically patient focused, but I think is closely related because it's this question of, is there health system capacity to act on the new information that will be produced by an AI tool, right? So we are now developing AI tools that are, predicting any number of different sort of clinical conditions, risk factors, et cetera. And again, that's the power of the tool, is that it can be, predict, very, very specific, potential issues, risks for patients. But if our health system has no capacity to act on those, it's not clear that we've really accomplished anything. And so what we're finding, at least at UCSF, is that we have these incredible researchers who are developing amazing tools, right? Lung nodule prediction, risk of suicide. But our system doesn't have capacity to follow up when we identify a risk. And so in some ways, all we're doing is creating risk for the institution without creating benefits for the patients or the system as a whole. So what we're trying to do is think about, like, what does that alignment piece look like? Again, how do we take the ability of a tool to make a prediction and ensure that we have also in parallel thought about the capacity to act on the output of that prediction so that we can actually improve care for patients? And so we've started to see this pop up in a couple of examples. If you click forward a few. So one of our clinical informatics fellows in the clinical informatics fellowship in my division built this incredibly accurate tool for lung nodule detection. She then took it to our health system and said, do you want to implement this? And they said, like, we have no capacity to act or follow up on this. So we never even implemented the tool because we didn't have the capacity. And so we're going to hopefully build that over time. But again, that's hiring new staff, that's figuring out new scheduling models for our clinics. So it's, again, just, the sort of downstream implications, she hadn't thought through. She thought, well, wouldn't it be helpful to have a better tool to do this? Well, yes, but that's only a piece of the problem. When my colleague Vinny Liu at Kaiser had the same story with his suicide risk prediction tool, again, even a higher stakes context, right? And so again, Kaiser said, well, we can't put this in until we know that we have the capacity in our health system to be able to respond to these immediately. And we have another colleague who's working at our county system who has an AI tool that allows you to basically identify an abnormal mammogram, in real time. And then our goal, especially in our county system, is if they're already on site for their mammogram, can we do the follow-up of the abnormal mammogram while they're already on site that day? Again, the tool doesn't help with that piece, right? That's the health system that has to be able to reorganize around that. So again, these are just, I think, 3 examples of, I suspect, many, where what AI is forcing us to do is to think more downstream in terms of capacity to act. And part of that, too, I think, is bringing together the capacity to act with the authority to act. Usually the people who are developing the tools are not the health system leaders. They're not the people who can understand whether we want to shift around staffing to be able to see more patients with issue X, Y, Z. And so how do we, sort of co-locate in some capacity the people who are developing the tools and identifying the capacity, but also have some authority to take action based on them. So again, I think this is going to force health systems and researchers to work in new ways, because to develop a tool that has no chance of ever making it into the real world, that's not a researcher's goal, but a lot of times they don't have visibility into that early on. They just assume, well, if I build a tool that does a better job of predicting X, Y, Z, of course our health system would want to implement that. So again, this is shifting the way that we're thinking about, these tools and where they have potential for impact. So if we go to the next slide. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think this is, again, these issues are coming up in different ways. And I think, what I liked about this study is that it actually could exacerbate frontline clinician burden and burnout if we give them a bunch of tools that they then don't have the capacity to act on. So again, sort of another signal of just the importance of thinking about these issues. I framed it from sort of a patient outcomes and benefits perspective, but even from the perspective of our providers, if we just stuff a bunch of prediction tools into the EHR and then they can't do anything about it, we haven't, we've only made their lives harder. So we'll go to the next slide. So I think there's some useful frameworks. Again, I try to include in my talks something useful that you can use, because I don't always have the solutions to these problems. But I think this is a really nice framework that's called the FIRM model to think about whether an AI model is fair, useful, reliable. And what I like is that it takes an AI tool and right in this work capacity, what is the theoretical utility? So again, you're starting a major Epic journey. Epic comes with hundreds of different AI tools. Specifically, would recommend thinking about what is the framework through which we can assess each of these AI tools and really figure out whether it's going to be the right fit for our system. Is this going to be a beneficial tool? Because all of the tools will add pieces of information, but again, you need to think about them in this much more holistic way. So I do think this is a nice framework that you can apply to a different, a breadth of tools to really figure out, is this the right fit for our system at this point in time? Okay, so if we keep going, okay, so you've gotten through two of my questions. Question 3 is a little bit more of sort of a broader conceptual question. In thinking about what is the optimal AI unit in the context of So right now, what you see sort of out on the market and what most health systems are sort of having to wrestle with is thousands of different AI tools, each of which do one or maybe 2 things. Frankly, it's almost overwhelming, I think, for people who are in whose job it is to figure out what AI tools should we implement. It's well, you could implement just, thousands of different tools, and each of them solves sort of a piece of a problem, usually in sort of one clinical area or one clinical workflow. And so again, I mean, each of those tools are valuable, but they're valuable in sort of a very narrow way. So that's what I think about where we are today. The unit is usually an isolated clinical prediction of some type, like the examples I just gave you. If we go to the next unit of scale, we are starting to see tools that really sort of take on what I would describe as like an entire workflow, right? So an AI scribe using AI to support that. And even in those tools, we're seeing expansion. So what AI scribes as they exist today, now we're seeing those vendors upstream to offer pre-charting and move downstream to be able to pen. So I do think what we're going to see is sort of the emergence of more platform technologies, but again, that exists largely within a single clinical workflow around sort of preparing for a visit, having the visit, and then doing the next steps that come after that visit. So it's going up from the unit of like a single clinical prediction, but again, it's still only like a piece of what we would think of in terms of like the whole process of care. So if we go up one more unit, so I think the question is like, is this where the future is headed? Is AI tools that are thinking much higher level at sort of a clinical and admin system operations? Are these tools going to start to tell you like, well, how should we be staffing all of our primary care clinics? What would be the optimal mix of visit slots to offer, right? So those tools we're just starting to see. There's, I think, an advertisement. Oh, perfect. An advertisement for the first sort of like AI run hospital, right? A company that says like, we will come in and offer you a technology that like will run your hospital for you. Again, I'm highly skeptical about whether the technology is ready to do that. But again, you can see that both from a sort of procurement friction perspective, as well as from like, well, part of the power of the technology is that it can understand the way that things work together in ways that, frankly, in most health systems, I think are very complex problems for humans to understand, because all of the inputs and outputs, right, at this point are so complex. So I think it's an open question about whether these AIs are heading in that direction and what that will mean. Okay, so let's see. Definitely hit the wrong button. See if we can get back to. Okay. I know. Just want to be able to say. Okay. Sounds good. You can go to the next slide. Oh. So I think one of the things that we've been very curious about is sort of when we're going to start to head more into the world of autonomous closed loop AI systems. Because at the point that you can take the human out of the loop, that actually makes a lot of the issues that I just talked about around sort of a lot of individual isolated tools, as well as this whole question of capacity, right? It takes those off the table. And so again, some of you may have seen that this was just a week or two ago. Oh, sorry, we jumped ahead a bit. Yep, keep going back, maybe 5 or 6 slides. Keep going. There we go. That Utah created basically like a regulatory sandbox to allow this company, Doctronic, to start to do AI, no human in the loop, medication refills. And as I think on the one hand, that sounds like, wow, this is crazy. I think if you look at the use cases that specifically, like we probably should never have had humans needing to be in the loop for some of these use cases to begin with. They are just like someone who has been on a medication for, decades, is like clearly, well controlled, right? Like, do we really need a human in the loop for that type of refill? So we're starting in, I think, actually a very safe place. But it is cracking open the door to thinking about what these systems, when they operate autonomously, can do. And I think it will be, state by state, whether there are states that are willing to sort of allow different experimentation with closed loop. So again, I wanted to highlight this because this is really the first of its kind, I think, to start to move into this territory. So if we go to the next slide. But I think, where I look to the future, right, is like, are we going to have autonomous systems that can really make sense of like the mess of how we deliver healthcare and start to really shift from humans using these tools to help inform decisions to autonomous AI systems that really are thinking about, well, like, how do you run a hospital? How do you run a health system? If my goal is to increase profit by 3% next year without compromising our quality metrics, what would be the 3 changes you would make? right? Like that's a question that our health system CEO would probably like some input into. And if there was really an AI system that could understand all of the complex components of how we deliver care and the trade-offs, how we use physical space, how we staff our hospitals and clinics, right? That this could really be a very, a fundamental change in how we think about running large organizations. So again, it comes back to this fascinating question to me of like the unit to which AI is applied. Right now, we're in the super, super narrow range. I think we're starting to sort of move up the chain, but when and how soon AI will be sort of have oversight over entire sort of sectors of healthcare delivery and be starting to sort of direct human actors and human resources. Like my guess is that we are not that far away from that, but I think it's an open question. And obviously with that question is like, what are the guardrails that come with that in terms of, ensuring equity and sort of all those other pieces come into play. Again, I think the questions are top of mind, but I'm just not sure that we have the frameworks yet to really be thinking about, how to work with that kind of predictive technology that has such a powerful influence over the way that human actors work and behave and organize themselves, and obviously the patient outcomes piece as well. Okay, so if we go to the next slide. So there's like a whole other conversation to have about sort of the market dynamics around AI tools. And again, you are going to Epic. Epic comes with like a set of like hundreds of pre-built tools that integrate seamlessly with Epic. And it's going to be really, really tempting to just say like, we should go with the Epic tool. And that's because of the market dynamics, because like Epic has a leg up in terms of getting Epic sites to use their AI. And I'm just using Epic as the example. That's true for every other EHR developer. But I think we also need to be thinking like, is Epic the best at making AI tools? Like probably not, right? They're good at it, but like, are they producing the best AI tools? No, we have a whole ecosystem of third parties who are much more sophisticated in terms of the AI tools they develop. Oftentimes there's an Epic or again, Oracle or whoever your EHR vendor is version of that AI tool. And then there's one that you could procure on the market from a third party vendor that just specializes in that. And so there's like a whole set of, I think, market dynamics that are playing out that I think from a policy perspective, we have to be asking ourselves, like, have we set up the market to deliver the best AI tools in healthcare? So again, that's a whole other topic. I just want to put a pin in that because again, I think especially as a place that's going to Epic, like you will be faced with these questions. Do we use the Epic discharge summary tool? Do we let a researcher build a discharge summary tool? Or do we go to the market and procure a best of breed discharge summary tool? And so you'll have to think about, again, the pros and cons of that, but just to know that like the market is set up right now to make it easier and less expensive to buy the Epic tool. And so it makes it hard to then say, when is it worth picking one of these other tools, even when we think they might be better? So I'll just frame that for now as an issue that I suspect is coming. Okay, so let's move on to question 4. And really at the end of the day, because there's so many fundamental questions about how AI will change different aspects of care, we are finding at least that it's very hard to assess that all in advance. And so really what we need to do is to think as best as we can about how to implement the tool and pilot scale, and then rapidly assess whether we think it's doing what we want, are there unintended consequences, and then scale that up. From there if we feel comfortable. And so this is like what our AI oversight process looks like over the AI lifecycle. So we start with just sort of taking a tool that we think solves one of our problems, trying to get as much information as we can about it. Again, if that tool is coming from a vendor, oftentimes it's really hard to get as much information as we think we need about it, to feel like we really understand the tool, what data it was trained on. Again, all of these market forces that I think work against full transparency in terms of the AI tools. And then we do a sort of development and evaluation phase. We have a health AI team, again, that has expertise specifically in assessing AI tools. We then go through integration. Again, if it's an Epic tool, it sort of comes pre-integrated. If it's an outside tool, we actually have to do the work ourselves to integrate that tool, which does come with cost and complexity. Then we move into some kind of a pilot. Again, for certain high-risk tools, we'll sometimes do a full like randomized trial of the tool, and in other cases we won't. Again, partly depends on the risk and the speed with which we think we need the solution. But really, that sounds like a lot of steps. But if you think about the life cycle of an AI tool, it's going to spend most of its time in this last phase, right? If it makes it through that process, right, where it's in routine use, and what we need is some way to monitor it on an ongoing basis. And so while in this, over the past couple years, we've had to spend most of our time in these first 4 columns, what we're really trying to do is be disciplined about what does AI monitoring look like, because we're going to soon have probably hundreds of tools in place, and we need to have a really robust monitoring structure for those tools so that we can understand their performance, their impact, any changes that we can detect over time. So if you go to the next slide, we were fortunate that at UCSF, we got a gift from a donor who somehow was like very keyed in on this issue of sort of monitoring the performance of AI tools, and not just sort of model drift and bias, but like how AI is impacting the healthcare, our healthcare system as a whole. And so he gave us some capacity to really think about like what does robust AI monitoring look like within a health system. And so we've spent the past year or so building out what we're calling our impact monitoring platform for AI in clinical care. And it has these different components to it. So there's real-time monitoring dashboard. So right now for each of our tools that we have implemented, we have a set of metrics. I'll show you one of the dashboards. Increasingly, I think we're just going to move away from dashboards as a thing, and there'll be much more sort of like nimble way of like, assessing metrics and data, allowing different stakeholders to come and ask questions. How is this tool performing in this clinic? Or how is this tool performing with our residents? But this is, again, the foundation for being able to ask those questions about tool performance. So that then has a data integration layer that comes with it, because, again, the tool itself is spitting out the data that then we need to use for monitoring. So we've had to do some data integration work. Even just the sort of knowing what's been implemented where, right? There's been a lot of work in infrastructure to think about, an AI model repository. How do we track the governance and compliance process that the tools have gone through? And then I mentioned the sort of, reporting and analytics layer. And then there's been a whole coordination layer too, again, which is AI tools have brought together different types of expertise, both within the health system and our research community in ways that we've never really worked together before. And for me personally, that's been one of the most fun parts, is to sort of say, what part of AI monitoring, like, do we know how to do? Because this is just part of running any type of clinical system, versus what AI monitoring problems are uniquely new and that we maybe don't even have the capabilities or understanding of how to do that. So when we run into those latter problems, we actually have a research incubator as part of this AI monitoring initiative. And now we've been able to pull in researchers to say, for example, so probably one of the hardest problems is like monitoring generative AI output. Again, it's a natural language. To know if something is accurate or inaccurate, we have very few automated tools to be able to do that. Frankly, as we've evaluated generative AI tools to date, we're like start, but like we can't do that on an ongoing basis. So we kicked it to our researchers and we're like, okay, we've heard about like LLMs as juries. So can we actually stand up an infrastructure like that, where you're having LLMs judge the output of other LLMs and come up with scores that we can use in an automated way? So again, there's a lot of sort of frontier work on the methods that we need to do AI monitoring. So what we've tried to do is take advantage of the fact that we have researchers who are interested in this, help them find interesting projects that then we hope will feed back into something that our health system can stand up in an operational context around AI monitoring. Again, happy to talk more about that, but that's sort of in a nutshell what this full stack AI monitoring piece has looked like at UCSF. Go to the next slide. So, we started off with like a very academic way of tool that we rolled out. We did a literature review and we prioritized different domains for monitoring, and then we came up with the measures by consensus. And then, those measures got built out and put into a dashboard. So if you go to the next slide. You can see this is like just one piece of our AI scribe monitoring dashboard. And again, I'm happy to share the details of this. There's like 4 or 5 more pages with more metrics. Like it was overkill, right? Like nobody can manage this much information and data. And so I think it was a great learning process for us to think about like what does sort of full stack monitoring look like. But I think pretty rapidly what we realized we need to get to, if you go to the next slide, is really think about what are the critical metrics and what are the alerting thresholds. And then who do we alert when something goes wrong? AI tool, and there will always be someone who's interested in one of those measures. But if we're going to get to scalable AI monitoring, we have to get down to sort of the critical set of measures for each tool. And then we have to think about like what are the parameters that signal some kind of a problem or an issue? And, something going slightly up or slightly down, like that's not going to be something that's a critical alert. And so literally just yesterday, we were in a meeting to start to set these thresholds, but like, this is frontier. Like nobody has, knows what the right threshold is. And even just trying to figure out like, who do you alert if this measure goes above, X% of what it was last month? Like whose problem is that? Who owns that problem? Who would be able to understand what to do next? So again, there've been fascinating, challenging conversations to have, but this is again, part of being able to make sure that our AI tools are safe and effective and trustworthy. This is the type of infrastructure that I think we need. And hopefully as we're learning how to do this and other sites are learning how to do this, again, it'll be able to be codified so that every health system doesn't have to think about this de novo. Okay, if you go to the next slide, we're almost at the end here. So again, these are some very practical operational questions, some research questions, and this is maybe moving back to just one of these more sort of conceptual, challenging issues for our field. And so how do we invest to create an AI-ready workforce? And again, in healthcare, there's lots of different segments of workforce to be thinking about. We just announced a partnership with OpenAI, where basically every employee on both our campus and health system side are going to have access to ChatGPT Enterprise. And we're rolling out this whole set of training modules to help people figure out like how do you use a general purpose LLM to help do your work better. Again, I think we're just at the start of figuring out what that looks like. There's some foundational training, but we're going to try to do sort of some role-specific training. But there's clearly, I think some foundational work, for just helping everyone figure out how to use, emerging technologies to do their work better. And especially because there's a lot of experimentation happening. And so what we're trying to figure out is how do we capture that experimentation that individuals are doing so that there can be sort of lessons learned and opportunities to share that. I went to the OpenAI training for UCSF, and I think one of the coolest things that I saw in there, which again, maybe many of you know, but I did not, is that people can build what they call like your own GPT. It's sort of like an agent that solves a problem for you in your work and workflow. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is you can then share that. You can share that GPT that you built with others. And so I think it's going to be that piece of sort of networking and peer learning that's going to be the most powerful, because in and of myself, right, I will only come up with so many creative ideas for how to do things. But if we can leverage the power of like all the people who do work similar to mine, and then we can start to share examples of how we're using the technology to do our work better, I think that's really where the power is going to come in terms of these tools. And sort of upskilling our workforce. If you go to the next slide, we're thinking a lot about this in the context of sort of, medical education, again, health professionals education in general. And so what you'll see out there in the world is a lot of these sort of basic curricula that are designed usually for a specialty. So I think ABFM put out, one of this as sort of like their core, like what does every family medicine physician need to know about AI? There's another one that came out of University of Michigan, I believe, that's really sort of focused on thinking about how do you use AI to help with sort of clinical reasoning, diagnostic decision making. So there are a lot of these courses out there that you can find. Again, you can decide like, are these pieces, but at this point, I'd say like not developing your own curricula around AI from scratch, because there is a lot out there, but sort of taking all the things that are out there and figuring out what's most relevant, I think is the most important opportunity right now. Again, these are just 2 examples of like hundreds of things that are out there. You go to the next slide. But I think for us, what's been far harder is like, at what point do we give our trainees access to AI tools like AI scribes, like diagnostic decision aids? And so, we had, I can't even tell you how many hours of meetings trying to decide, like, do we give our AI scribe to like all of our trainees? Do we limit it to only sort of residents and fellows? And it's just these really profound questions about sort of at what point do we feel like someone is ready to use one of these tools? And frankly, our different clinical programs like felt differently about this. Some of them were like, nope, we want to give it to everyone from day one. And others were like, nope, we should only sort of reserve it for our most senior trainees. And again, it's just reflective. I think everyone's struggling with like how to introduce these tools in ways that confer the benefits, but then don't risk, not developing really critical skills, for, clinicians, nurses, again, whoever it may be. So again, I was, we're seeing this now in the popular press, right? Institutions that are saying like, how do we make these decisions, and how do we, I think, make them collectively, or at least learn from different decisions in a way that helps bring some evidence to bear. So if you go to the next slide, so I sort of feel like we're trapped in this loop between we want to upskill people to use AI, but we also don't want them to use AI to de-skill or never skill. And so, again, I don't think we have the answers today for how to get out of this loop. But I think at the end of the day, I mean, I'm a researcher, so I'm biased, but like I approach this like as an empirical question, right? And so what it's really forced us to say is like, well, how do we measure acquisition of skills in that given health profession? And it's really forced, I think, us to turn back to the measures that we use and to say, like, are these measures ready for the AI era? Because if we're really worried about de-skilling, we need to have a measure of skill. And I think our measurement framework isn't really up to that task, unfortunately. So we're going back to just some of the fundamental conversations. How do you measure clinical reasoning? How do we know if our trainees are developing that skill and what that trajectory looks like, such that we could, when we introduce AI, we can see, is it changing that trajectory or not? And that's the empirical question, but you need the measurement infrastructure to sit under that. Okay, so I think if you go to the final slide. So anyway, I hope this tour through like the questions that have been on my mind have been helpful, has had something for everyone, depending on whether you're coming at this from more of a research or operational perspective. It's an incredibly exciting time, but there's just more questions than answers. And so what I've found is that these questions seem like they're percolating around in every institution that I've been to. And so, how can we start to have the conversation together and to move forward in ways, again, that harness the incredible opportunity of technology with all of the right sort of safeguards and ways to ensure that we're not going to experience significant unintended consequences. I will leave it at that. I think we're probably time-wise. You'll have to tell me if there's time for questions. Okay. Yeah, no, I'm happy to thoughts, questions.
Hang on, I'll bring the microphone back. One hand up back.
Sure. Thank you so much. This was really fascinating. I'm Victoria Belniak. I'm Kaleida Health's Compliance and Privacy Officer. And I wanted to go back to your question one, and I don't know if this is a question or more of a comment, that our little group here, Charlie Abel, Dr. Faterik, we're part of the AI review board at Kaleida Health, and we're really focused on governance around AI. But one of the things when it comes to patient engagement is we're really focused on, we have patients that are fearful of AI. So it's the patients are all in, some of them are all in, prompting AI with questions, but we recognize the need to communicate with our patients upfront to say that we're going to use AI. And that is a particular challenge for us to be able to kind of get the word out there that we want to promote the use of AI, but to not be fearful, because that fear is not necessarily based in a place that we can really address the fear. So that's been one of our challenges, is to communicate with our patients about AI. So again, it's not a question.
Yeah,
This feels like ancillary to what you're talking about with.
No, I mean, it's a really important issue. And I have to say, as part of IMPACT, that was initially part of our scope, was like, we're going to also, as part of IMPACT, disclose to patients how we're using AI. And our compliance officer was like, nope, we're not going to do that. I said, we don't disclose to patients when we use clinical decision support. Like they don't know. So why would we disclose when we're using sort of just an AI version of clinical? So again, I think it's these like foundational questions. I mean, I do think, I mean, in California, at least, we have a law that says like if we're going to use AI in a patient-facing capacity, that we do have to disclose to them. So I think for us, that was never sort of on the table to decide. But in terms of the clinical uses that patients wouldn't have visibility into, whether and how we disclose that is another really important question. And again, I don't know that anyone has the answer, but I think it's sitting in compliance right now is sort of this key. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think the patient data is clear that like there's, I heard someone present it yesterday, it's like 20% love it, 20% don't, and then the remainder just don't know. And so it's, again, it's not even like we're at an 80-20 rule. It's, yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Phil Glick from the Department of Surgery. We currently are going to a one vendor EMR in our system. And my question is, does UCSF have one vendor EMR? And have you found going with the add-on bells and whistles from the vendor has its benefits and drawbacks because they're not as sophisticated as third parties? But what happens when you hang a third party agentic LLM on your primary EMR and they do an EMR update? Do you then have to send that back to the third-party vendor to get updated? I mean, how does all that integrate with third-party vendors and primary EMRs?
Yeah, great question. So we have had Epic since 2012. But to say we've had Epic, like we just put in the lab module last year. So it's like, it is this process of sort of, moving usually, even when you implement an enterprise solution, like to sort of bringing all the modules and components online can take for us like over a decade. But I will say that like the integration that comes with it is the advantage and is a huge advantage to have all the information, in the same system, same backend. From a research perspective, it's been transformational in terms of going one place to access the full set of clinical data. The third-party tool integration, I'd say, is it's very doable, but it's not easy. And so it comes with cost and complexity. And so again, you sort of have to decide like how much you want to invest in that capacity. And then, again, depending on the use case, like we don't want to get too much far into sort of standards-based APIs, but like depending on the type of data that third-party tool needs to read, if it's sort of a standard set of like labs and meds, like that's going to be easier. If it needs to read like, complex like tumor, then it can take more work to try to integrate the tool. So there is friction, but I think there's a spectrum. And then it's really an institutional decision about sort of how much time and effort, you want to put into building a platform through Epic that does more third-party tool integration. I'd say we do a fairly limited amount because of the cost and complexity. So a tool really has to be like notably better for it to feel worth that investment. They think is the best. And so that's again where the sort of governance piece comes in. And it's a tension, I think, between, how much you want to lock down your central system. And then your point about upgrades is spot on too, right? I mean, the upgrades can be extremely disruptive to anything you've bolted on. And so again, it's the cost and complexity that comes with that. And so you just have to decide if the benefit of those tools are sort of worth all of it. But we do some level of it. But I would say in general, it's hard to maintain like hundreds and hundreds of bolt-on tools because of that friction.
Hi, I'm Sushma Tandla. I'm a family physician at UB MD. Can you hear me?
Yeah, a little better now, yeah.
Okay. So I work at ACMC Family. So I have a fourth-year medical students who actually created an AI audiovisual tool for summarizing the recommendations from, say, the AHA, ACC for hypertension, and then the ADA for diabetes. And so that's been very useful. And I'm sure kind of all of us who work in the trenches, I call, don't share the same stress that the administrators have. But it has really given us a way to educate the patient in 2 minutes. Whatever you want to say through the interpreter comes out in Bengali. There's an English version part of it. And then the patient is educated in 2 minutes.
I love hearing these examples because
Right.
again, I mean, this.
And also the second question I had, great. So I really love your idea of having the partnership with an AI agency. And I think we do a lot of co-pilot through Microsoft. So I'm not sure if that's some place that we could expose the physicians to AI and not just like bring it through the EMR. Like they have to know how AI works, what's an agent, and it has made so much difference in so many other categories. So why not healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where you just get into some of the issues of like, if it's working with PHI, right, it has to be in a somewhat different environment than some of the sort of standard back office tools. So anyway, but yes, I think your point is right. Like they may already be exposed to it. And so it's an opportunity to sort of say, like, you're already working with it in this context, and if we can do it in another context.
Sorry. So I did the like a little training about AI, equity, and stuff in education, and just mentioned my idea to one of the medical students during the clerkship. Then he came back in his 4th year.
Like,
out on ChatGPT, and I assume that that's all covered here, but what we just talked about, but that's a big issue because everybody wants to do really great stuff, but it feels like we need a bubble around us so that we don't have stuff going out. Sure, we have pilots, but it's not under.
yeah. It's a hard problem. I mean, I think from an institutional perspective, you just have to try to make the right thing to do the easy thing to do, because if not, people will work around it. And so that's, again, it's partly why we went with an enterprise ChatGPT license, because we knew that people were putting PHI into. So, you know, again, but those are investments that the institution has to make. So you have to, it's a risk, you know, sort of risk benefit trade-off that is tricky. Yeah, I mean, even with open evidence, I think we're in the same boat, right? So that's a tool that like we know all of our clinicians are using regularly. We try to tell them like, you know, not to put PHI in, but there's certainly, it's happening.
Dr. Adler, Christian Fiterik, Chief Health Information Officer for Kaleida. Wonderful talk. Thanks for coming out. And to Dr. Brashear's point, we have another 30 medical student who also had created a very important social determinants of health tool for us that we had piloted in Kaleida as well. So a lot of innovation happening with medical school. My question for you is, I hold a lot of optimism for AI tools to decrease the cognitive burden for that electronic health records create. But at the same time, I also share your opinion that it can create a lot of potential for burnout. And so I want to sort of just maybe explore that a little bit more of whether it would potentially help us the way how we interact with the systems or actually create more burnout.
So it's definitely both. I mean, we are seeing in our own data that, you know, that the tools we've introduced, they're having major reductions in cognitive burden, and like that's incredibly powerful. I mean, I think we're starting to win back some of the hearts and minds of our clinicians who we lost during the EHR rollout era. that's why, again, I'll be fascinated to know that because you are doing your next big rollout, like while these tools exist, sort of whether your story will be different because, again, I think there was we started this with very little trust among our clinicians that these tools were going to be helpful. So it's been really delightful to see. But I think the risk that you're pointing to is there, which is like if we just stuff the EHR with all of these tools that then say this prediction, that prediction, like I think they have to be paired with like, and what is the next step? And can we actually even take that next step or just pend that next step for you to say like, yep, this is your assessment of the risk. This is the right next step. There's actually capacity to take that next step. And so it's just, so I think we have to think about it in the context of the whole workflow. That's really the key. And again, that's my concern is like, as we've gotten more and more sort of researchers involved is like, they don't know the workflows. So they just are bringing this sort of one tool with this one piece of information. And so that's where we've had to do a lot of work around sort of building a process that can take all of these innovations and really connect them to the workflow in a way that we're confident will be sort of burden reducing, effort reducing. And so again, it's an investment you have to make, but that's what takes a lot of these examples of these tools and I think turns them into things that the clinicians really love. Yeah.
So much for the great presentation today. My name is Miso. I'm an assistant professor at School of Nursing. I'm not a clinician, so I'm genuinely curious. How do we truly measure that generative AI is improving the healthcare delivery overall? I understand, it's taking over. We do need to invest in education and both in the clinician side as well. But what's a percentage per se that we give to the real practical work, hands-on work, as opposed to AI work in improving healthcare overall?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, we tend to think about it in terms of like different types of measures that we think represent, improvement, so to speak. So we usually have, a set of like clinician-centric measures. So things like how much time are they spending in the EHR? How much time are they spending on documentation? Like those are probably the most proximate measures of benefit and the reason that we put the tools in to begin with. And then we do some surveying to ask about things like cognitive burden reduction. And so, I'd say there's like a whole set of like clinician-centric measures. And then there are more patient-centric measures. So like diagnostic accuracy. And again, those are harder to measure. And so we have to decide like how critical is it for us to assess whether this tool is having that type of benefit to decide if we want to sort of put the resources into doing the measurement around it. But there's, I'd say like a whole set of measures around that. And then we have usually a set of equity measures as well. So like, do we think that patients are equitably benefiting from this? So I thought the language example was a nice one because like when we put in our AI scribe, we knew that that tool wouldn't be able to support, I mean, many of the tools now support quite a large set of languages, but at the start, the tool didn't support that. So then there was like a whole set of questions around equity. So we usually sort of take the dimension of healthcare delivery that we're thinking about, and then we think about what is the measure. The point I'll end on too that I think is a useful summary of the talk is like, what do we compare that measure against? Is it perfection or is it sort of the current state of where healthcare is? And I'd say almost all of these tools do better than the current state. For example, right, like these language translation issues, like before we just were not serving that patient population in an effective way. But are the tools perfect? No. And so the measures, when you're doing the sort of measurement of impact piece, you always have to think about like, to what am I comparing this? And if your bar is perfection, these tools are going to disappoint. But if your bar is like, is it better than how we were delivering care without this tool? It's almost always like notably better, I would say. And so that's what leaves me optimistic is that, again, I think these tools are really improving care in meaningful ways, but we also still have a lot of work to get to them sort of operating in sort of a perfect way.
Julia, we have one last question that was posed online. Do you mind? It's from one of our hospital leaders, and she's asking, as organizations adopt AI, what has been the hardest organizational change, not technical from your vantage, but that leaders underestimate and that they should address it early?
Hard question. I would say for us, it took us a while to figure out the right structure as an organization to put around AI. I think we knew we needed some of this, like our chief health AI officer, but they don't own, AI is a solution. They don't own the problem space. And so it was really about structuring who understands the problem space well enough to understand whether there is an opportunity for an AI tool to really have impact. And so I think now what we have is this sort of dual structure where the problem owners, which we will call like our clinical delivery pod leaders, like they're really involved in AI governance in a way that I think at the start they weren't. And like that's been transformational. I don't know that it was hard. We just didn't see it at the start. And so now that we see that like they need to be at the table and really be actively involved in the conversations around like what problems are you trying to solve? And then we can bring the AI piece in to say, okay, like this is where the solution set is, this is where we think it could have impact, and sort of that balance between sort of the technologists and the people who really sort of oversee the clinical problem space, whatever that may be. So I'd say that. But it's a great question. I'll have to think about it more. I mean, then there's the resources. I mean, that's probably always the biggest challenge, is that all of this costs money, and you just have all the investments that a health system can make. How much do you want to invest in the AI tools versus, you know, building a new operating room or all the other things that demand resources? So, you know, that's not an AI problem. That's a general problem. But, you know, these tools are not cheap. And so, you know, we are having to have real discussions about resources.
Well, I want to say thank you on behalf of all of us, all of our partners that were here today. The comments in the chat were terrific. I was getting text messages while I was playing Vanna White for you back there. People saying very positive things about the talk. And sorry about the technology issues, but we limped through it. So thank you so much for joining us today.